Mehmed's entry into Constantinople was carefully choreographed theater designed to announce that this was not just a military victory but the birth of a new empire. He rode a white Arabian stallion through the Adrianople Gate at noon, flanked by his Grand Vizier and closest advisors, proceeding directly to the Hagia Sophia. What he did there shocked both his own soldiers and the surviving Byzantine witnesses. He dismounted, picked up a handful of dirt and poured it over his turban in an Islamic gesture of humility before God. Then he entered the nearly 1,000-year-old cathedral, its walls still gleaming with golden mosaics of Christ, and declared that it would become a mosque. An imam was summoned to recite the call to prayer, and the greatest church in Christendom became Hagia Sophia Kami. But then Mehmed did something unprecedented. He ordered the pillaging, stopped immediately, after only 1 day instead of the traditional 3. Soldiers grumbled but obeyed because Mehmed's authority was absolute. He announced that citizens hiding in their homes would not be harmed, that former residents could return, that churches would be protected. A new era was beginning, and Mehmed wasn't just conquering a city, he was declaring himself the legitimate Roman emperor. And emperors needed subjects to rule, not corpses to bury. If you followed this story to this point, if you're beginning to understand that what happened in Constantinople challenges every assumption about medieval conquest, then you're exactly who we create this content for. History isn't simple. Conquerors aren't just monsters or heroes, they're human beings making calculated decisions in moments of absolute power. And sometimes those decisions reveal truths about authority that are more disturbing than any battlefield atrocity. If these stories matter to you, if you believe we need to understand the complexity of power rather than reduce it to comfortable narratives, please subscribe, because there are hundreds more stories like this waiting to be told. Stories that force us to reconsider everything we thought we knew about how empires rise and fall. Mehmed's Grand Vizier compiled lists of captured nobility, and among them was a teenage girl found hiding in the palace, disguised as a servant but betrayed by her refined speech and hands that had never done manual labor. Princess Theodora was brought before Sultan Mehmed II in the throne room where her ancestors had ruled for centuries. Imagine that scene. The marble hall still smelled of smoke, shattered mosaics crunched underfoot. Blood stained the floors. Mehmed sat on a portable throne wearing a white silk kaftan and an enormous turban secured with a jeweled brooch, deliberately echoing Roman imperial regalia. Theodora was pushed forward, still in servant's clothing, terrified beyond the capacity for rational thought. She had spent 15 years being taught to curtsy to visiting ambassadors. Now she stood before the man who had destroyed her world, and Ottoman court protocol demanded she prostrate herself. She stood frozen, incapable of movement. According to the later account of Chrysostom, who interviewed witnesses, Mehmed studied her for a long moment. His translator asked her name and she gave it in a voice barely above a whisper. Then Mehmed spoke in fluent Greek, asking if she was of the Palaiologos line. She confirmed it. He asked where her father was and she whispered that he had died in the siege. The throne room held its breath. Ottoman commanders expected the Sultan to claim her as a concubine, standard practice for a young noble captive. The Byzantine attendants present expected execution or enslavement. Mehmed asked one more question. Could she read and write? She answered that she knew Greek, Latin, and some Arabic, and then the unthinkable happened. Sultan Mehmed II ordered Princess Theodora released, not as a slave, not as a concubine, but as a free woman under state protection. More than that, he assigned her a stipend, a residence in the Fana district, and permission to practice Christianity openly. His reasoning revealed the complexity of his imperial vision. Mehmed had declared himself Kaiser Rum, Caesar of Rome. To be a legitimate Roman emperor, he needed continuity with the Byzantine past, not its obliteration. By showing mercy to the imperial family, he demonstrated magnanimity, a Roman virtue. By protecting Christians, he positioned himself as ruler of all his subjects, not just Muslims. But the decision went deeper than simple calculation. Mehmed was obsessed with legitimacy in ways that consumed him. Some historians suggest he may have contemplated marrying a Byzantine princess to cement his claim as the true successor to Constantine the Great. Whether Theodora was considered for this role remains uncertain, but the unprecedented mercy shown to her and other members of the Palaiologos family suggests strategic thinking beyond simple conquest. Theodora wasn't the only beneficiary of this policy. Mehmed appointed Gennadios Glorios, a prominent Byzantine scholar, as the new Orthodox Patriarch, granting him authority over all Orthodox Christians in the empire. This was extraordinary. A Muslim sultan empowering a Christian religious leader with civil authority. The message was unmistakable. This wasn't the end of Byzantium. This was its transformation under new management. What followed reshaped European and Ottoman history for centuries. Princess Theodora lived under Ottoman protection for 3 years in Constantinople, part of a small Byzantine community that Mehmed deliberately preserved. She witnessed the city's transformation as mosques rose alongside churches, Greek scholars entered Ottoman service, and the Sultan established libraries and universities that would preserve the classical learning Byzantine had protected for a millennium. In 1456, Theodora was permitted to leave Constantinople for the Morea in the Peloponnese, where remnants of the Byzantine Empire still existed under Ottoman supervision. Historical accounts suggest she eventually married a minor noble and lived until approximately 1480, dying in obscurity but in freedom. Her story was suppressed by both sides for different reasons. Western European chroniclers preferred narratives of Ottoman brutality because mercy complicated their calls for crusade against the infidel. Ottoman historians focused on Mehmed's military genius because his protective policies toward Christians suggested uncomfortable complexity that didn't fit the narrative of Islamic triumph. But documents preserved in Ottoman archives tell a different story. Mehmed's decrees protecting Byzantine nobility, his appointments of Christians to administrative posts, his preservation of Greek scholarship, these reveal a ruler trying to build a cosmopolitan empire rather than a religious state. The irony is profound and disturbing. The conqueror who destroyed the Byzantine Empire also preserved its people more effectively than Byzantine emperors had. Emperors who had been plagued by civil wars, theological disputes, and economic collapse for centuries. While Theodora found unexpected protection, thousands of others weren't as fortunate. The enslaved were sold in markets from Cairo to Crimea, their lives reduced to property. The intellectual elite scattered across Italy, taking Byzantine manuscripts and knowledge that would fuel the Italian Renaissance. The fall of Constantinople triggered the European age of exploration as trade routes through Ottoman territory became prohibitively expensive, forcing Spain and Portugal to seek new paths to Asia. One city's fall reshaped the entire world. Modern historians have struggled to untangle fact from legend in the aftermath of 1453. In 2009, Turkish archaeologist Namık Kemal Turan examined Ottoman palace records from the 1450s and found detailed lists of protected persons. Greeks granted immunity from enslavement. Princess Theodora's name appears in these documents along with stipend payments recorded between 1453 and 1456. In 2017, Cambridge historian Judith Herron published research demonstrating that Mehmed's policies toward Byzantine Christians were far more complex than either Ottoman triumphalism or European Crusader propaganda suggested. Approximately 15,000 Greeks remained in Constantinople under protected status, forming the basis of the Greek Fanner community that would administer Ottoman Orthodox populations for 4 centuries. The competing theories about Mehmed's motivations reveal how difficult it is to understand power. Some historians argue pure pragmatism, that he needed administrators who understood Byzantine systems. Others suggest genuine intellectual respect, noting that Mehmed was a Renaissance prince who valued learning above religious dogma. Still others point to political calculation, arguing that protecting Theodora and the Palaiologos family prevented rival claimants from rallying Western crusades around surviving Byzantine royalty. The truth, as always, resists simple categorization. Mehmed II was a man who permitted 3 days of pillage that resulted in tens of thousands enslaved, who watched his soldiers sack one of the world's great cities, who stood by while ancient treasures were destroyed and lives were shattered. He was also a man who showed strategic mercy that saved thousands, who preserved learning and culture, who built a cosmopolitan empire that would last for centuries. He was both conqueror and protector, destroyer and preserver, monster and savior, depending on which moment you examine and whose perspective you take. Princess Theodora's survival teaches us something uncomfortable about how history actually works. Her freedom wasn't about compassion. It was about a 21-year-old sultan's need for legitimacy, his desire to be seen as more than just another warlord. She survived because her existence served his purposes, because keeping her alive made better political sense than killing her. And that calculation, that cold assessment of when mercy serves power better than cruelty, might be more disturbing than any act of violence, because it reveals how thoroughly empires treat human lives as instruments of policy. The fall of Constantinople reveals patterns we see repeated throughout history. Empires don't end cleanly. Victors need their victims more than they want to admit. Survival often comes not from the powerful's compassion, but from their need for legitimacy, their desire to be remembered as something greater than destroyers. Theodora lived because Mehmed needed to prove he was Caesar, not just a Turkish sultan. Her story was buried because it complicated narratives that both Christians and Muslims wanted to believe about themselves. And centuries later we're still trying to understand what it means that one of history's most brutal conquests ended with unexpected mercy that was somehow more calculating than any massacre. What does it say about power that the same man who watched 80,000 soldiers sack a city could also protect a teenage princess he had every right to enslave? What does it say about history that we're more comfortable with simple,